Thanks to Deep Sentinel for keeping LegalEagle safe and sound. Get 15% off the only security system that stops crime before it happens with a link below. So let's move on to something that is a little bit more fun and lighthearted. Murder. Welcome back to Laws Broken, where an attorney destroys your favorite movies by showing you how illegal everything is, because everything is illegal. Who doesn't love Indiana Jones, the story of a swashbuckling hero professor who saves the world from Nazi megalomania and wins the heart of his fair maiden? Yes, I'm talking about 1981's box office smash, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. You probably remember this as wholesome family entertainment, where a professor who happens to be good with a whip saves the world from the worst villains on the planet. Nazis. The movie seems to have it all. Indiana Jones outwitting bad guys and sporting a cool hat, an arrogant French baddie who gets his comeuppance, and a spirited heroine who falls in love with the man who saves her life. Well, I hate to break it to you, but Indiana Jones isn't exactly a humble archaeologist. This is a movie where the hero travels the world looting graves and temples, stealing artifacts, and permanently destroying precious historical sites. You know, kind of like the Taliban. He admits to serious crimes against the woman that he's supposed to be in love with, and the movie also has an absurdly high body count. And despite all of the property destruction, grave robbing, murder, kidnapping, and rape, this movie inspired several Disney park attractions. So come for a crazy ride with me as we discover the dark side of Indiana Jones and all the laws broken.
Did you guys ever go to Sunday school?
So let's start with the grave robbing. If you thought it didn't seem right that Indiana Jones was stealing precious artifacts and bringing them home to the United States, and pillaging the Jovitos, well, you might be right. Indiana Jones is an archaeologist who purports to save things to put them in a museum, but is he allowed to steal artifacts from foreign countries and graves to fill a Chicago museum? No? Yes? Well, maybe. Jones may say he wants rare artifacts to be placed in a museum, but later in his apartment we see a number of artifacts that he probably didn't buy from Home Goods. So what's the real story on people who find, buy, and sell artifacts? Well, treasure hunters, antique dealers, and even museums get busted all the time for selling or transferring or transporting stolen artifacts. And now, for the part you've been waiting for, is Indiana Jones a grave-robbing profiteer? Well, antiques trading can be perfectly legal or totally illegal depending on where the artifacts are found and how they are sold. As long as a person follows the laws of the country of origin regarding excavation, transport, and sale of archaeological artifacts, the trade is generally legal. However, there's also a billion-dollar black market for ancient antique objects. There's no one international law that all nations must follow. Instead, artifacts are protected by treaties like the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. This is a treaty ratified by 132 countries that protects cultural property during wars and armed conflicts. There's also the Rome Statute establishing the International Criminal Court, which makes it a war crime to deliberately target religious, educational, artistic, or scientific properties for destruction or defacement. The UNESCO Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property is meant to stop the circulation of stolen items, and this convention gives member nations the right to recover stolen or illegally exported antiquities from member countries. Currently, 140 countries are parties to this convention, including Egypt, Nepal, Greece, and all of the South American countries that Indiana Jones may have visited. The United States ratified the UNESCO Convention and implemented it with the Convention on Cultural Property Implementation Act, or CIPA. CIPA applies if the objects are actually cultural artifacts or they are stolen or exported. CIPA includes a safe harbor provision that allows for the import of cultural artifacts to the United States if the importer can provide an export certificate from the foreign country. And the safe harbor provision also applies if the importer can produce satisfactory evidence that the material was either exported prior to the date the import restrictions were published in the Federal Register, or exported from the foreign country at least 10 years prior to the date of entry into the United States. Now, I can hear the internet comments already. There was no CIPA when Indiana Jones museumed the stuff from the South American temple, but it's worth noting that this movie is set in the 1930s, which was kind of a big news decade, in case you were wondering and haven't opened a history book. The Nazis really did loot and plunder priceless works of art, antique objects, and property of people they murdered. And these events actually were the impetus for the international treaties that would one day stop Indiana Jones from taking home souvenirs from his archaeological digs, or at least force him to produce a permit or satisfactory evidence showing that he came by the objects legally. Lawyers, always making people do more paperwork. In America, there is another important law in this particular case, the National Stolen Property Act, or NSPA, which makes it a felony to knowingly possess, conceal, sell, or dispose of any goods of the value of $5,000 or more, which have crossed a state or US boundary after being stolen. The federal government is more likely to use this law than SEPA when someone makes a claim that an American illegally acquired foreign antiquities. And under the NSPA, the word stolen takes on a different meaning than what we're used to in general parlance. Generally, when something is removed from a person or a business or institution, that's theft. But under the NSPA, an object doesn't have to be actually taken from a person or business. Stolen can also mean removed from an abandoned place like a temple or a grave or a historical site that nobody officially owns. So it's illegal under the NSPA to take something from a foreign country without explicit permission from its current government, or taking something with permission of a colonial or occupying force rather than from the country's current legitimate government. So Indiana Jones could try to defend his theft by arguing that nobody actually owned the golden idol. However, the NSPA also applies when a government simply declares an artifact stolen. This is usually enough in situations where it seems like no one actually owns the artifact in question. And when Jones took the golden idol away from a temple in the deep jungle of South America, let's just say it was from Brazil, it was only a crime if Brazil had passed a law or otherwise declared it a state-owned cultural object. If a foreign government doesn't make an ownership declaration, then some American courts reason that prosecuting people in the US for illegally exporting artifacts from foreign nations would simply amount to the United States enforcing the other nation's laws for them. Now, Indiana Jones isn't the only one engaging in some suspicious activity here. There's also the treachery of Belloc. But stealing the idol from Dr. Jones in the first place brings up another question. Could Belloc get in trouble for stealing the golden idol from Indy?
Dr. Jones, again we see there is nothing you can possess which I cannot take away.
Well, in most jurisdictions, if a person accepts possession of goods or property and knew that they were stolen, this is a crime. We don't want people claiming that they didn't know the thing was stolen in the first place and just getting away with selling clearly stolen property. And for the sake of this exploration, let's assume that Belloc sets up a shop in the US with the idol that he took from Dr. Jones. In the United States, receipt of stolen property is a federal crime under 18 U.S.C. 2315, defined as knowingly receiving, concealing, or disposing of stolen property with a value of at least $5,000 that also constitutes interstate commerce. If Belloc intended to move the idol across state lines, he could be prosecuted for receipt of possession of stolen property. He'd also be subject to prosecution under the NSPA. Of course, receiving and selling stolen property is usually a state law crime, so Belloc would certainly be guilty of all of the state law crimes as well.
I am a shadowy reflection of you. It will take only a nudge to make you like me, to push you out of the light.
And anyone who received the idol from Belloc would also be guilty. As law students learn from their property and criminal law courses, a thief can't pass good title to stolen objects. And a stolen object retains its stolen status forever, no matter when the thief happens to have taken the object or how many different people held on to that object. This actually happens with some frequency in the art world. And for all of you budding art collectors out there, an object's status as stolen also doesn't change if someone buys it in good faith down the line without knowledge that it was stolen many owners ago. Many disappointed art collectors and museums have been forced to return objects that they thought they had purchased from a reputable source. Hobby Lobby recently had to return thousands of Middle Eastern artifacts because they had been wrongfully acquired. This is why Jones' ultimate motive for removing the items doesn't really matter. So Jones went to South America and entered the sanctuary of a temple and removed the golden idol. Did he have a permit for that expedition? It doesn't look like it, and that means he didn't have the permission of whoever owned the site or whatever government is in power. And although this particular expedition probably isn't a war crime, it's still serious enough that Jones is guilty of violating the UNESCO Convention as well as SEPA. He's also in big trouble for removing objects from all over the world and bringing them back to the US. Even if some of the sites were abandoned, like the sanctuary in the opening sequence, probably doesn't matter, and Jones could expect to be prosecuted as a repeat offender under the NSPA. And although Jones steals the Ark of the Covenant, it's unclear whether the US government would prosecute him for the theft under SEPA or the NSPA. But I have been informed that the US government has top men working on this investigation.
Top men.
Top men. So that's your general history lesson. Now let's move on to interpersonal communications. Generally in American cinema, we don't like our protagonists engaging in questionable sexual behavior. We're not the French. But here's a scene you probably don't remember seeing the first time around. Recall that Jones has an affair with Marion Ravenwood, his professor's daughter. Seems normal.
I learned to hate you in the last 10 years.
I never meant to hurt you.
I was a child. I was in love. It was wrong and you knew it.
Yikes.
I did what I did. You don't have to be happy about it, but maybe we can help each other out now.
Double yikes. Did Indiana Jones just admit to the fact of statutory rape, then say he was tired of saying sorry, then he needed a $3,000 gold medallion? Well, here's the context, and I'm not sure that that actually makes it any better. The Raiders of the Lost Ark screenplay was pretty clear about Marion's age. It says she was about 25 years old when the movie begins. Marion was the daughter of Jones's mentor, Abner Ravenwood. Jones said he hadn't spoken to Marion for 10 years, which means that 10 years ago they had a relationship. Here's the problem. If Marion was 25 during the film, then she was with Jones 10 years earlier when she was just 15 years old. And since that description is off screen, we could maybe guesstimate that Lucas, Spielberg, and screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan were not thinking that precisely about Marion's age and hadn't gone to all the trouble of subtracting 10 from 25 and getting 15. But we would probably be wrong. A few years ago, a transcript of a discussion between Lucas, Spielberg, and Kasdan made the rounds. The three men talked about Marion's age and her involvement with Jones. They decided that she had to be under the age of 16 when she was with Jones. So yes, they knew what they were doing. And on screen, Marion says she was a child and Jones doesn't deny that it happened. He even tells her that she needs to get over it.
I did what I did. You don't have to be happy about it, but maybe we can help each other out now.
Hashtag me too. Now, this is not a laughing matter. Statutory rape is a crime that involves sexual contact with a person who is under the age specified by law, commonly referred to as the age of consent. The age of consent differs from state to state, and so does the name of the crime. And most states no longer refer to this crime as statutory rape, instead using terms such as sexual intercourse with a minor, sexual assault of a child, or criminal sexual penetration of a minor child under a certain age. Now, statutory rape in general is based on the notion that a person under a certain age cannot consent to sexual contact or activity because he or she lacks the maturity or judgment necessary to make a knowing choice about sexual activity. And statutory rape is one of the rare strict liability criminal offenses out there. That means that the mental state of the offender isn't really relevant. If the sexual contact happened, the defendant has no defense because the victim is deemed too young to have been capable of consenting. That means that even if the defendant honestly and reasonably believed that the minor was old enough to give legal consent, they are still guilty of the offense. And that's not even the situation we have in this film. Here, Indiana Jones was mentored by Marion's father, and he knew her when she was growing up. He agrees that yes, he had a relationship with her when she was a minor and knew it.
I never meant to hurt you.
It was wrong and you knew it.
And for jurisdictional purposes, let's assume that this happened in Illinois, where Jones was living when he was at the University of Chicago. If Marion was 15 at the time she was with Indy, then he would be in big trouble, regardless of whether she was in love or he thought she could consent. And Jones could also be prosecuted for aggravated criminal sexual abuse because he was in a position of trust, authority, or supervision over Marion. Remember, he was a teaching assistant to her father and may be considered someone who was in a position of trust. So the conclusion is that Jones is guilty of second-degree sexual assault because she was 15 years old when he had a relationship with her and he was more than 5 years older than she was. Indiana Jones doesn't really have a defense and can expect a minimum jail term of 3 to 7 years in prison, a fine of up to $25,000, or both. He could also have to register as a sex offender. So how are we feeling about the good old days of family-friendly entertainment now? Yikes. So let's move on to something that is a little bit more fun and lighthearted. Murder. You may recall that Indiana Jones is being chased through the streets of Cairo by a bunch of goons when he hits a dead end, and there he finds a man with a sword. After the man impressively demonstrates how he would cut Jones up, Indiana Jones pulls out a gun and shoots the man dead. This scene was not brought to you by Smith & Wesson. The original scene was supposed to be an epic sword fight that would take 3 days to film, but at the time, Ford kept running into a stomach bug. He asked Steven Spielberg if he could just, quote, shoot the son of a Indiana Jones, brought to you by dysentery. But what about his foe in this movie? Was Jones justified in shooting this man? Was it murder, or could he shoot this SOB in self-defense? Well, American law generally has different rules for the use of deadly force in self-defense than use of non-deadly force in self-defense. And generally you can use non-deadly force to defend yourself against any unlawful attack, and also to defend your property against theft or unlawful damage. Now, it varies slightly state by state. But when you're defending yourself from non-deadly force, you can only use the amount of force necessary to fend off the attacker. And you should also probably retreat if possible. Now, traditionally, you could use deadly force to defend yourself only if you were being threatened with death, serious bodily injury, rape, or kidnapping. So imagine that someone takes a swing at you outside of a bar. They miss, but they're mad and you know it. What can you do? You can meet their violence only with the amount of force necessary to fend off the attacker. Therefore, you can punch the person to prevent them from hitting you. But you can't pull out a gun and shoot the puncher, because in this hypothetical, you didn't reasonably fear for your life just because someone wanted to fight you. You could also leave the scene and flee entirely. However, things get more complicated when the person threatening you is brandishing objects that could inflict more damage than a fist. Can you shoot someone for brandishing a sword? During the 1930s, when this movie took place, if you were outside of your home and were approached by an aggressor, you could only use deadly force if someone attacked you with deadly force. A famous treatise on criminal law states that, quote, merely to threaten death or serious bodily harm without any intention to carry out the threat is not to use deadly force, so that one may be justified in pointing a gun at his attacker when he would not be justified pulling the trigger. Following these principles, a guy could brandish that sword without triggering Jones's right to use deadly force. And many state courts have held that a defendant's mere display of a knife during a fight, while implying the threat of violence, does not constitute deadly force. The prosecution would argue that Jones just stood there, which shows that there was plenty of time for him to run or even walk away. But Indiana Jones's lawyers would obviously say that there was nowhere for him to run, since he had already been attacked by people in the market and was surrounded by bad guys. In modern law, there's a trend to give people greater rights to use deadly force, because America. But many state laws say that a person must have a reasonable belief of imminent death or injury, and the inability to retreat in safety in order to use lethal force. And then there are the so-called stand your ground laws, which give people the right to use deadly force in any place where they have a legal right to be, as long as they reasonably feared serious bodily harm or death. They don't have the duty to retreat. US states are pretty evenly split between stand your ground laws and duty to retreat laws. Now, it's possible that Indiana Jones would have a good case for self-defense under these modern flexible deadly force laws. But the biggest problem is that Jones doesn't even try to get away. Indiana Jones would have to prove that he's in distress and fear of his life, and he has no choice but to shoot his way out of a jam. However, that's a hard argument to make when he's literally just standing there looking pretty relaxed given the situation. And there's also a lot of witnesses who don't exactly look like they'd be favorable to his defense. So the conclusion here is that Jones is probably guilty of some variety of murder here. Since this wasn't a premeditated crime, he could be convicted of second-degree murder, which is typically defined as a murder that is not premeditated, or murder that is caused by the offender's reckless conduct that displays an obvious lack of concern for human life. The penalty for second-degree murder in most jurisdictions is about 10 years to life. Now, before we tally up all the crimes against Indiana Jones and see how long he's going to jail, let's talk about the dishonorable mentions of all the other crimes that were committed. Indiana Jones is not the only one who's up to no good in this movie, and the cartoonish violence includes a lot of carnage. There are of course lots of bad guy crimes by people who work for the Nazis. In Nepal, they burned down Marion's bar during a gunfight that they started. This is arson. They're also guilty of murder and attempted murder many times over. The baddies did a lot of criming during the market scene in Egypt. Look at all the unprovoked battery offenses with punches and various weapons, and again, attempted murders. Here they're kidnapping Marion inside of a basket.
You can't do this to me! I'm an American!
And here, Indy avoids just being stabbed. This was an attempted murder since the guy had a long knife and wanted to kill Dr. Jones. Under US law, when Indy moves away at the last second and the guy stabs someone else to death by accident, he can still be charged with felony murder. Indiana Jones pushing and shoving people and opening their baskets forcefully constitutes assault and battery and trespass to chattels. And of course, there's no exception because he's looking for Marion. Some random beggars robbed Indiana Jones while he was hiding around the corner. Indiana Jones shoots up a vehicle he thinks Marion is in. It catches fire and everybody dies. Whoopsie.
Whoopsie.
Bare-chested Nazi commits some very poorly choreographed batteries against Indiana Jones and then dies in a way that might be negligent homicide. While driving a truck, Indiana Jones takes out some Bedouins building a house on the side of the road, at the very least negligent homicide. During the chase scene, Jones has to throw a lot of guys off a truck. Let's declare this self-defense, so take one away. A German U-boat intercepts Indiana Jones's boat to steal back the Ark and kidnap Marion. Now luckily for you, I'm not going to go off the deep end about maritime law, but boarding a foreign flagged vessel constitutes interference with the normal freedom of navigation and lawful passage in accordance with the law of the sea. And finally, this monkey sells out Marion to the bad guys, clearly committing a conspiracy to kidnap Marion, but monkeys can't be convicted of crimes. Then of course there's Belloc, who gets his hands very dirty, who is but a shadowy reflection of Indiana Jones, who commits multiple crimes against Marion, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault battery, and threatened with attempted rape. For statutory rape, he's probably looking at least 3 years in prison. Belloc locks Jones in a tomb. This is both false imprisonment and kidnapping. And Belloc tries to kill Jones at least 10 times in this movie, which is 10 counts of either attempted murder or conspiracy to commit murder. Just because he's not getting his hands actually dirty with the murder itself doesn't absolve him of these crimes. And of course, many of these attempted murders are clearly premeditated, which would mean premeditated first-degree murder. Belloc is also guilty of the same antiquities violations as Dr. Jones, and not for nothing, Belloc did try to commit genocide against the entire planet by arming the Nazis with the Ark of the Covenant. But now let's tally up the crimes against Dr. Henry Jones Jr., aka Indiana Jones. For the antiquities violations, Jones is likely to get at least 1 year in prison for violating the NSPS, a $10,000 fine, and of course, returning all of the artifacts that he stole back to their original country of origin. For statutory rape, he's probably looking at least 3 years in prison. For all of the murders that Indiana Jones committed, assuming that self-defense does not apply, and that's probably a coin flip depending on the jurisdiction, he'd probably get about 10 years in jail for the guy with the sword, 50 years in jail for the people killed when he blew up the truck, and about 20 years in jail for negligent homicide when he drove the truck into some people on the side of the road, for a total of about 84 years in prison. Dr. Indiana Jones, you belong in a museum.
That belongs in a museum.
And by museum, I mean jail. But the thing is, if Indiana Jones comes for your artifacts, you'd better have a good security system to stop him. And Deep Sentinel is just that. While most security systems would simply record Indy breaking into your home or stealing your packages, Deep Sentinel would actually stop it because it's the only security system that has a real human guard watching your cameras in real time. I actually use Deep Sentinel for my own house because it's not like other security systems. Their cameras have a two-way speaker built in, so when they detect an intruder or a package thief, they actively intervene and either scare the intruder away or call the police. Because a better way to solve crime is to stop it before it happens. I used to live in a house with a traditional security system with one of those stupid keypads where the alarm would go off if you didn't enter your code in time. And I actually got fined hundreds of dollars when the police were called out on a false alarm. But Deep Sentinel is different. Deep Sentinel is the only security company that actually monitors your property in real time and will actually intervene before something happens. When the camera detects a visitor, the guards log into your system and assess the situation. Then the loud two-way speaker lets Deep Sentinel guards intervene and stop crime before it happens. They can ask the visitor questions or tell them that the police are on their way. It's absolutely genius. And they've done this for me many times. Their guards have even called me to summarize what's going on in front of my house and let me know that they're actively watching the situation. It's the kind of dynamic response that only a human can provide. And Deep Sentinel responds in seconds when traditional alarm systems would take half an hour, if they responded at all. And smart cameras, which are actually pretty dumb, will just give you a video of what happened after the fact. Because Deep Sentinel uses real humans, there are virtually no false alarms, and I haven't had a single package stolen since I've installed Deep Sentinel. And of course, Deep Sentinel is Wi-Fi and app enabled, so I can pull out my phone and check on my front porch or backyard with one click anywhere in the world. And I can turn on the two-way radio and I can talk to delivery people or guests myself. And the system even automatically tells me when packages are delivered. So if you'd like to try the only security system that has real human guards, Legal Eagles will get 15% off when you go to deepsentinel.com/LegalEagle or use the promo code LegalEagle at checkout. But this is a special deal that will expire in a few days and only if you use the link below. below. So get 15% off of Deep Sentinel when you go to deepsentinel.com/LegalEagle or use the link in the description. Plus, clicking on that link really helps out this channel. So, do you agree with my verdict for Indy? Should Indy go to jail for longer? Leave your objections in the comments, and check out this playlist over here with all of my other Laws Broken videos like Home Alone and Willy Wonka. It's all there. So just click on this playlist, and I'll see you in court.